There's a certain kind of profile that seems to emerge, especially among late diagnosed autistics. And it seems to often include many of the things that you have seen on my channel and many other trauma related channels. And the reason for that is that the relationship between high masking autism and trauma, I believe, has an intersection or an overlayering, I don't know why that came out weird, of hypervigilance and of how that plays out in terms of sensitivity and response. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but the bottom line is that having things like thinking and believing, and you may actually be an empath, highly sensitive, have complex trauma, different mental health challenges, all of that really kind of like plugs into this presentation of what people's lives look like when they've been making do in spite of or alongside the way their brains and bodies and lives have played out. I want to talk about this because I think it's been an incredibly important part of my journey and understanding autism and trauma. And even if you decide, I don't think I'm autistic, but I definitely have some subclinical traits in these certain places, sensory issues, social issues, routines, repetitive behaviors. What's important is not necessarily a diagnosis, though that may be important for you. And that is something that is, frankly, a whole separate conversation, given the different options that, or frankly, the lack of options you might have with an autism diagnosis, for example, even an ADHD diagnosis in the military, through adoption. I mean, you have to get a waiver if you have ADHD to join the military, which is, I mean, it makes sense, I guess, but it's like a whole separate process that is frankly remarkable when you realize how many people have some form of ADHD, just ADHD, and not, I'm not saying just ADHD, because ADHD can be and is most often significantly impactful on people's lives. But we either don't deal with it and we don't identify it and don't believe in it, or we say, you know, you're overdiagnosing, or we make a bigger deal out of it. So we have these wide pendulum swings. So as a parent also of a child with pretty severe ADHD, I can tell you that from the time they were little, it has been complicated. And so, and not just one child, but different dynamics. The point is, these things make a difference in our lives, and I believe understanding them is important. So as a result of my quest to understand, is everything complex trauma, as many of you know, I found my way into, for many reasons, trying to understand high masking autism in girls and women, but really in anyone, because anyone can have this profile. But there seems to be more and more research emerging that, for example, late diagnosed autistic adults, late diagnosed people who don't fit inside the traditional box of being studied, seem to have this collection of things going on. And so here to me are 10, if they're all going on, or the majority of them, really important things to look at to begin to understand if you may or may not have something like autism, and then what to do with it. The truth is, the what to do with it isn't so easy if you're high masking. There actually aren't a lot of resources all the way across the board with autism, it seems. But the point is, understanding it might change the way you look at your life. For example, me understanding more about my brain and my sensory issues is removing this label of, oh, you're just like high maintenance, or why does this bother you? It's also validated so many things, as I've said. Like, one of them was every time I went to somewhere like Disneyland with my kids when they were little, which I loved, it was a very overstimulating experience for different reasons, but the food options would send me into a panic for many reasons. And it was like, back then, I think there were other parts going on with me. But the point is, like, I would feel so dysregulated for lots of reasons, the stimulation, the food, but yet want to be there. And so that push pull inside that I could never quite understand, like, why is this such an anxious anxiety provoking day, for example. All of those things are so impactful because they validate, and ideally they can form accommodations for your life, new ways you can approach things like transitioning between one thing to the next, more rest time, more special interest time, for example, supports if you need them, accommodations if you need them, all of those things. So, the number one thing I want to layer this with is that we have to presume, if you're late diagnosed and high masking on some level, that there is a layer of social camouflage, of masking, of compensatory strategies you've been using. Meaning that in many ways, you've been doing things to get through it. And in many regards, I think doing them so long that you just think that's who you are. In my new course, I finally just finished this weekend. I really do believe that there's this trauma personality that we have. And we just think that, well, I'm high maintenance and everything bothers me. And, this is just who I am. And in large part, sure, there's an underlying, I believe, of temperament and genetics and all of that. But this environmental dynamic, the world, all of that can really, truly affect what you think of as just how you are. And if you're fine with it and not suffering, then I guess it doesn't matter. But I do think that, for example, avoiding conflict can be very much part of a trauma response. And it can be holding you back from the life you want because you can't face self-advocacy because it feels like conflict. And so you self-silence, for example. So let's presume that everything we're talking about has that layer of camouflaging. The first thing is that you have been and or are diagnosed or see yourself as someone who is likely highly sensitive, an empath, which I often think of empaths as being trained, traumatized children who've become hypervigilant, not in everything, but this combination of high sensitivity and empathy. In part, we can be more sensitive, like I'm saying, as our temperament. But I think for many of us, it was a survival response. Being aware of what others needed and then giving it to them, one way or the other, becomes who we are. But really, it's about survival first and foremost in terms of attachment, for example. So you have had or you have chronic mental health issues, often physical health issues. You've been mislabeled, misdiagnosed, whether it's borderline, and you also have ADHD misdiagnosed, which, by the way, if you are autistic, there's a very good chance you might also have ADHD, but not the other way around. So if you just have ADHD, and I hate the word just there, but if you have ADHD, it doesn't equal out. It's not as likely you'll have anywhere near autism, but autism, highly likely ADHD. You've been diagnosed with potentially things like depression, like I'm saying, anxiety, OCD. But the core piece is that something is always missing often about how to treat, how to respond to what really goes on with you. I've shared, I think on TikTok, even with my own therapist, because she's not trained in these and really aware, I don't think, of this new conversation around autism. There are some things I think always get interpreted through the lens of my trauma and my personality, and I am learning, and I don't even bother going into that because I know that, for example, my difficulty with like following through on things and planning an organization and bill paying and going to the doctors and all of that, it's not all self-neglect. And my brain really struggles with many of those factors. So the point is, there's a level there that everything I described you relate to, but it might also feel like something is missing, a piece is missing. Number two, you have always had social issues, okay? From dreading social events to being just like everyone else, to changing who you are to fit in with friend groups, to feeling like your social battery is drained after socializing, especially, to preferring like one friend or just a few people, hating small talk often, like just not liking the social dynamics as they've gone in your life and them not really going well. Having repeated friendship breakups, it might be that they moved away from you or you decided one day you were done with them. But there's this like thing where it just doesn't quite match up. Like when I see people that have had lifelong friends and I just don't, it's like, what? Like I don't fully get it. And I thought it was only because of my traumas, which I will say something like a really terrible divorce when you're the only one and all your friends are married, and then you move. Like, of course, all those things, but I thought it was only those things. And then I would realize I took too much in the friendships and didn't speak up for myself. And then the last straw was something that I just couldn't take anymore. And so my point is, those don't make me autistic, but this collection of repeated social dynamics, literally dreading every single social thing I plan, which by the way is very, very, very minimal. Like, and it has nothing to do with the people, but never wanting to go to call them until the last minute, like all of it just feeling overwhelming. Number 3, unrecognized, strong sensory sensitivities. So you've always had issues with the tag in the back of your shirt. Now you can buy shirts without them, right? But fabric, texture, smells, lights, sounds. And when they're not working for you, that not just being like, okay, well, I don't really, that it like really bothers you, right? I've talked about smell is a huge one for me, kind of like a rage inducing response to something that I feel is intolerable, that is hard to control when it happens. Lights, everything around how you set up your world is about no overhead lights and lamps and candles and soft fabrics. And like I'm saying, often misophonia, that response, that rage response to the sound of other people's mouth, they're chewing, the sounds I can make when I'm making videos. I know for some of you, I try to edit, say I just did it, I try to edit those out, but it's difficult when you do them a lot. And so the point is, there's this long standing, it's not just like, oh, I had a trauma, because the truth is, outside of my parents being eggshell, the majority of my traumas that would explain many of these that are PTSD and then CPTSD, like death and divorce and abandonment and, medical traumas, those all came in my adult life. But all these things were there my whole life. To being misperceived, we're going to talk about that later, but like it's always been there. So that's important. Number 4 is this executive functioning thing you've always struggled with. And the thing is, people wouldn't recognize the fact that you go to work, let's say, but you struggle with a lot of tasks that you're supposed to be doing, paying your bills, keeping your house clean, going to the grocery store. And I think everyone struggles because the amount of things we're supposed to do is insane, literally, from supplements and vitamins and organic and the grocery store and pay your bills and clean your house and disinfect. I mean, it's crazy. But the thing is, when you have these executive functioning difficulties, you often like it's kind of a faking of it, right? So you might present one way, but the rest of your life doesn't look like that. And you might have shame. You might be in denial about it, even to yourself, how truly bad it is that you only pay your bills when the creditors call, for example. But at your job, you're like a CEO. It's kind of insane because if you move up the ladder, you actually get more help with things, right? At least at work. So there's all these strategies, these compensatory things we do. But the truth is, inside, if you like pull the mask off, there's a mismatch or a difficulty. And also, we know that a lot of people who are autistic really struggle to maintain employment. And so I'm wondering now about if being at home has been better or worse. My suspicion is for many people it's better because there's less triggers, less stimulation. They can work different hours. But the point is, all of that is impactful. So you manage it, but you really struggle. The next one is stimming. So in some fashion, from skin picking, feet picking, cuticle picking, twirling your hair, tapping on things, could be rocking in some regard, repeating phrases, listening to the same songs over and over and over in the same shows. There's this repetition, there's this regulation that engaging in those kind of behaviors or patterns is soothing for you in some way. And it's not necessarily something you would tell everyone. Yeah, I watched Friends, the same episode or the same seasons over and over and over again. I have a lot of clients that do watch Friends and do that. But in general, whether it's Harry Potter or whatever, there's a lot of rewatching of those things and engagement. And once again, it could be a thought dynamic as well. The next one is overthinking, overfeeling, and overanalyzing. And these really do connect to that hypervigilant piece. But I would say that what I've learned is the autistic brain, the anxious brain is just always playing out scenarios. Like it's like the brain will never shut up. It's always on. This idea of an inner voice, inner monologue. Like I can wake up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, and within seconds, I'm thinking about 10 different thoughts and worries and they're not even always worries. They're just like random things. It's like, oh my God, go back to sleep. And without certain strategies, I can't necessarily go back to sleep. And so when you have insomnia, especially when you have hormonally driven insomnia, true insomnia in your body and mind, if you let yourself start to think about certain things, it's very stimulating and then often dysregulating inside. But I've always said, like, overfeel, overthink, like that's just how I've always been. And in certain places it gets rewarded, like my job, for example, but it's very impactful on your life. And so you have a hard time turning that off. Number 7 is that you've had, as a result of a lot of this overstimulation and lack of access to routine or repetitions, whatever it is, meltdowns, shutdowns, burnouts that you thought were due to different things, but at the core, you hide the fact that you cry yourself to sleep, or that you feel so dysregulated, or that you couldn't work for a week, and whatever, months, could be years, right, for burnout. The point is, there's this significant piece that you struggle with that nothing really seems to fully explain, and it has had a profound impact on your life. Your high sensitivity, your great emotional responses, how you just collapse and just can't do anything else sometimes, like more often than not. Number 8 is hypervigilance. So I've learned more than anything that hypervigilance in autism seems to really serve mostly a social function. It's about scanning for rejection, for fitting in, for the scripts you're going to use, for behaviors. It's like there's a reason to scan, and then a responsiveness to increase that social piece for you. But I also think the brain often seems like to be autistic is to have a good amount of anxiety, at least in late diagnosed people. And so that hypervigilance kind of holds hands with that, right? That just overthinking, overfeeling, overanalyzing. And then in trauma, especially if you have like eggshell parents, as I've talked about, narcissistic, borderline, immature caregivers, they might have autism, ADHD, bipolar, whatever it is. For whatever reason, it was important for you to stay on guard and scanning, and then to make meaning, and then to do something about it. Oftentimes in a caretaking, fawning, pleasing, freezing, flight, removing yourself. So there's like this whole point of like, you need to be on guard, and then from a hyper kind of sensitive perspective, you need to do something to make your caregiver happier, to be their best friend, to soothe them, whatever it is. Go play alone in your room. Number 9 is that you have this significant pattern of routine and repetition. And so when you don't have those things, you feel dysregulated. Now, you might just think, well, that's just how I do things. But then you realize when those things can't happen, it's really hard for you to move outside of those boundaries, right? If the electricity goes out and you can't do your routine, no one likes that. But when you're so used to a pattern that gives you a sense of security inside and you lose that, it's very difficult. So you do your morning routine the same way every day. There's a system to things. There's a process. There's an order, and that increases security. Not to say everyone that does that is autistic, but the point is that is a piece of this that is important for you. And lastly, I've grouped 2 things together. It really should be 10 and 11, but it's like intimacy and being alone are related. And so the interactions with other humans often have an impact on how you're perceived. So you don't like to be hugged, or you like certain kinds of deep, hard, firm hugs. You don't want to tell people that you don't like being touched, but there's a dysregulation to that. Intimacy is a challenge when it comes to the sensory pieces, especially. But I think for many of us, we've been taught to mask so much that we don't even realize how much we hate the sound of someone makes during intimacy, or the smells or the tastes are very difficult to manage. And of course, when it's new and novel, it might be easier to kind of push through that. But like everything, once the reality sets in, it's even more dysregulating. And connected to that, kind of really 11, is that you tend to isolate more often than not. You like being alone, that you've maybe been shamed for that you like the aloneness because you feel regulated. And this is true for trauma as well. It's the only time you often feel like your body is relaxed, but there can be a place where it pushes you into loneliness. And yet the idea of being with others and the stimulation and all it costs you can be a real push-pull for you, right? So you long for these things. Other times you really just need them, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there can be this misperception and connection to isolating and being alone. And for many people, I do believe that it's actually a very enjoyable experience. Like, we can be alone too much, and then that can create loneliness because it's been so much of that we've pushed others away, not built connections and things like that. So far, this is what I've discovered more often than not, that this pattern of late diagnosed autistic people has this kind of certain flavor to it, where we're kind of good at like making you like us or being whatever warm, but like there's like a performance to that. Not that it's not real, but that we've learned to just engage in certain ways so much. I was reflecting on several things in my life where I have been, I think, misperceived, and it was shocking from the time I was a kid. A really kind of like traumatic event when I was a kid, being babysat with a parent who I barely knew, whose daughter me and my best friend did not like. And we were playing hide and seek or in the house. I mean, I must have been like 6 or 7. And I said something like, this was the 60s, 70s. Where's that little stinker or booger, which would have been something that my parents probably would have said. And the mom found out, and I barely knew her. The mom I normally stayed with when my mom was gone, was gone. It was like a substitute mom who's, like I said, daughter we did not like, me and my best friend Mandy. And she called me to the kitchen. I'll never forget this. And she started me, and I like lost control of my bladder in the process. This is so embarrassing, but whatever. I'm like, screw it. I'm 56 years old. And I was horrified. Like, I was old enough to know I was ashamed she was doing that. I was mortified that I had had this accident. And then I got sent up to a room alone in this place with this person I didn't know, all for saying something like that. And then I've reflected on that memory that there have been lots of times where I've been misperceived. Another one was I was my first job out of college at a PR firm in San Diego, like the top PR firm. And that sounds great. I wasn't making much money, but I was an executive account assistant. And I had a boss that was sort of like, I guess you would say she was like Miranda in The Devil Wears Prada. She was hard. And there were 3 of us in this like bank area. And I was on the phone. I had a really like tough boss. And so I remember thinking that like I always felt like I could never handle conflict. I ended up leaving that job and going to grad school to get my master's degree at that point in psychology, and I got my doctorate in my 40s. But I was on the phone with a vendor, and I overheard the 2 of them say, and I was like, what? Like, I just, now I can understand why, as I've said in a few videos. Like, I get it. I've been told I have a strong personality, and I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I feel like, and that has gotten a lot stronger since in the last 15 years. But historically, I would have said, I don't speak up for myself. I don't whatever. I think I was always misperceived in some regards because I kind of didn't really care what other people thought sometimes on the outside, but of course I did on the inside. And my point is, those don't mean anything except for to say that they never matched up to like, why am I getting in trouble for this? Like, why does someone think that? Like, I think I'm too soft. What do you mean? And so, the point is that these things are impactful to who we think we are. And there's a lot of shame built in when who you think you are and the feedback you get doesn't match up, And so that's why I think understanding this concept has been so important for me. It's helping me put pieces together that I just thought, like I said, you're high maintenance and everything bothers you, and like, what's wrong with you? And why are you so picky? And why does everything have to be a certain way? Because it's dysregulating, that's why. Because I can't be my best self that way. The thing is, for most of my life, I didn't tell anyone that. Even my own kids, I didn't set enough boundaries. It wasn't like I was the parent that said, you have to load the dishwasher this way. I would just redo it, or I just skip it, whatever. But the point is that in many places, it didn't match up. And the internal organization about that, or trying to understand that, didn't make sense. And that is what is helping me understand more and more, and to have compassion, and to say, you know what, I need more downtime, or I'm not going to work for the next 6 hours. I'm going to watch this show and then I'll work. To work on the weekends for 12 hours all weekend, but have taken half a day on another day because I just couldn't do it. This is what's empowering about it, I feel like. And so I don't know where we're going to end up with all of this. I keep saying that I don't know everything about this. I'm still learning, and I'm just sharing it with you. But it has been like, I can't explain it, like a piece of the puzzle is finally making sense for me. And this is the language I've heard from so many other people. When they say this to me, I go ding, 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 that there might be something else, especially if we've already been talking about trauma and yet something else feels like, God, but there's just something else. And the something else is a complicated something else. But I think it's important and empowering. So that being said, thank you for being here. Now that I've finally posted my course, which, oh my God, I've worked on more than anything else. I swear to God, in the longest time, I had forgotten, it's been a couple years, how much work making courses is. And I kind of overdid it. There are 43 videos, 77 lessons, but some of them are like 2 minutes, some are like 15 minutes, 80 pages in the workbook of everything from attachment, complex trauma, trauma triggers, everything about hypervigilance. You can imagine how that connects to all of this, emotional abuse, how to create identity for yourself, how to connect to your emotions. Like it's just, it was really, I kept thinking like, this is too much, but I can't leave this out because they're going to need this. DBT skills, polyvagal theory, nervous system regulation skills. It's a lot, but I'm truly hopeful that if you decide to, to take the course, that it will be an empowering course for you. And I will say, if you are high masking autistic, while the course is not built around that, the hypervigilance is the connector to pretty much every lesson in the course. And I really believe that many of those who have autism, especially high masking, very likely had, possibly with the statistics, undiagnosed autistic parents, those with ADHD, could be trauma, borderline, whatever, that they had their own issues, and that there's most often for many people, they're saying, yes, I'm autistic, and my parents struggled in some way with these behaviors that I do call eggshell, which are high levels of unpredictability, instability, and various and varying levels of emotional security and attachment, or insecurity and attachment. Most especially often that anxious and avoidant kind of back and forth piece, which we talk about. So anyway, that's it. Thank you so much for being here. I'm planning on being here again this weekend and going back to like Wednesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday posts. That's my goal. I know I keep saying that, but I honestly just kept redoing that course and adding more and redoing it and adding more. And then even when you're making the course and you're loading all the videos, then the website doesn't work. I mean, it's just, or you have to update your laptop. Like, I swear to God, it was insane. So anyway, I have more projects coming, hopefully soon, on hypervigilance and all these concepts. But I really believe that this is one of the biggest pieces of my life. Like, how have I used this crazy part of trauma and lack of predictability with my parents? The light bulb has gone off around hypervigilance. And I really believe this, and that's what you hear, is that once you realize that you're scanning your husband when he walks in the door, your wife, and they're not saying a word, and you're making meaning, are they moody? Are they this? Are they that? Are they mad at me? All the way up to your, spouses are screaming and yelling, your parents are, your kids are, that you're doing that and making meaning. Like, it's kind of crazy how much we do this. And so it's interesting to think that how these hardest parts of your life can also shape kind of like what you can give back. So anyway, I know I'm rambling. Thanks for being here. Have a good day, and I will see you soon. Bye.